The storm hit the city just after midnight, slamming against the tall glass buildings like fists of wind and water, but inside the dim, echoing warehouse, a single father named Daniel kept pushing his broom forward, step by heavy step, as though the whole world depended on it. His back ached, his eyes burned from exhaustion, and his fingers were numb from the cold seeping in through the loading dock doors. Yet he kept going, because this night shift was all he had left, the job that stood between his little daughter and homelessness, the one chance he had to climb out of the sinking sand his life had become. What he didn't know was that someone else was there too that night, someone hidden in the shadows of the upper walkway, someone who saw everything he tried to hide behind tired eyes and a forced smile. Red Heart, if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Your support helps keep meaningful stories alive. Red Heart. Daniel had never planned on becoming a night janitor. 2 years ago, he had been a rising supervisor at a construction company, a man who carried hope in his pockets and laughter in his home. But life had a cruel way of unraveling even the strongest threads. His wife, Anna, had grown ill so quickly that the doctors themselves struggled to understand the progression. Their savings dried up almost overnight, and when she passed, the grief left him hollow and stumbling. He tried his best to hold everything together for his daughter Lily, a 6-year-old girl with wide brown eyes and a fragile heart that didn't fully understand why her mother never came back home. The medical debt and funeral costs crushed him, forcing him to take the only job he could find on short notice, cleaning the massive headquarters of a multinational corporation through the dead hours of the night. It paid little but gave him just enough to provide food, rent for a tiny apartment, and school supplies for his daughter. It wasn't the life he imagined, but it was the one he was fighting to keep. Every night was a battle against bone-deep exhaustion. Daniel cared for Lily during the day, cooking quick meals, helping with her homework, and tucking her into bed with stories he made up while yawning. By the time he left for work, the sky was always dark, and he often carried her photograph in his pocket just to remind himself why this grind mattered. The warehouse floors stretched endlessly in all directions, polished marble and glass that reflected every failure he felt weighed upon his shoulders. He worked quietly, head down, rarely speaking to anyone. Most employees had already gone home, but sometimes the night security guard would nod to him, a silent acknowledgement of a man who worked too hard with too little in return. What Daniel didn't know was that the corporation's CEO, Elena Hartwell, had been staying late for weeks trying to navigate a financial crisis and internal restructuring. She was never meant to cross paths with the janitorial staff, but one night, as she walked down the upper floor walkway overlooking the lobby, she paused when she saw Daniel. He was kneeling beside a spill, but instead of rushing through the task, he meticulously scrubbed the edges, pausing every few seconds to shake out his hand when pain shot up his wrist. She noticed the limp in his gait, the fatigue that clung to him like a second shadow, and the moment he stopped to catch his breath with both hands braced on his knees. Something in his expression made her look closer, an aching mixture of determination and sadness she couldn't shake loose. Elena had built her company with grit and intelligence, but she had also been accused of being too distant, too cold, too focused on numbers and not enough on people. Watching the janitor work, she realized how disconnected she had become from the real lives around her. She stayed hidden that night, not wanting to break the fragile, private world he seemed to exist in. But she kept observing him, quietly, for several nights. She saw the way he rubbed his temples when headaches struck, the way he carried a small lunchbox that he never ate from until his break at 3 a.m., and the way he sometimes pulled out a small photo from his pocket to whisper a silent promise to it. She didn't know the story behind his pain, but she felt it. Then came the night everything changed. Daniel arrived late, drenched and shivering from the storm outside. His jacket was torn at the sleeve, and his boots made wet slapping sounds on the floor. He had carried Lily through the rain earlier after the bus broke down on the way home from school, and he hadn't had time to change or even dry off properly. His entire body ached, but he clocked in anyway and grabbed his broom with trembling hands. Elena watched him from the walkway again, her chest tight as she listened to the storm batter the building. Tonight, his movements were slow, almost staggering. He tried to lift a heavy trash bag, but halfway through, his grip slipped and he fell to his knees. He stayed down for several seconds, head bowed, shoulders shaking, not with the flu or cold, but with the kind of silent frustration only someone who had lost too much could understand. When he finally stood up again, chest heaving, she saw something that broke her heart completely. He whispered to himself that he couldn't quit, not now, not when Lily needed him most. She didn't hear the exact words, but she could see the desperation in every line of his face. Elena had seen employees struggle before, but nothing prepared her for the raw humanity she witnessed that night. She decided she needed to know who this man was, what he carried, and why he seemed to fight a war entirely alone. The next evening, she requested his file from HR, expecting a standard employee profile. What she found instead was a painfully thin folder containing only basic information: widowed, single parent, working night shifts for just over a year, no disciplinary record, always punctual, never complained. But the absence of information spoke louder than any report. It showed a man who carried his burdens silently, who slipped through the cracks unnoticed. Elena felt a weight settle on her shoulders as she realized how many lives existed in the margins of her company, unseen and unheard. She decided she would meet him. Not with an audience, not with corporate formality, but as one human being reaching out to another. But before she could approach him, she wanted to understand him fully, to make sure she chose her words with the care he deserved. So she came earlier than usual, hidden again in the shadows of the walkway, observing the man who pushed himself harder than anyone she had ever employed. On the third night, she watched as Daniel cleaned the massive glass wall in the lobby. But halfway through, his hand slipped as fatigue overwhelmed him, and the bottle of cleaner shattered on the floor. He froze, staring at the broken shards, panic creeping into his eyes. For a moment, he pressed his hand against his forehead and whispered something she couldn't hear. She watched him crouch down to pick up the pieces, cut his finger, wince, wipe the blood on his sleeve, and continue cleaning without stopping. It was the smallest thing, but it shattered her. No CEO, no human being, Elena thought, should witness something like this and do nothing. The moment he stood up and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, she made her decision. She was going to change this man's life. She didn't know how yet. But she would. And she would do it in a way he never expected. Yellowheart, if this story is touching your heart so far, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Your support helps us continue creating emotional stories that inspire hope. Yellowheart. She waited until the end of his shift when he returned to the small janitor's closet to put away his equipment. He looked completely drained, shoulders slumped, head lowered, as though the weight of everything he'd been carrying was finally too much. And that was the moment she stepped forward, finally revealing herself to the man who never knew she had been watching. What she told him next left him speechless. She explained that she had seen his dedication, his work ethic, the quiet suffering he thought no one noticed, and she told him about the nights she had watched him fight through exhaustion, pain, and grief. She said she had been searching for someone to manage a new division focused on employee welfare and resilience, someone who understood hardship, someone who embodied perseverance, someone who had lived through the kind of battles money couldn't fix. And she believed that person was him. Daniel couldn't speak. His chest tightened with disbelief as she placed a new contract in his trembling hands, a position with daytime hours, triple the salary, full benefits for him and Lily, and guaranteed mentorship to help him grow into leadership roles. He stared at it, unable to process how a night that had begun in misery was ending in a miracle. Elena told him she couldn't replace what he'd lost, but she could honor the strength he had shown. She said she saw him, truly saw him, when the world didn't. And she wanted the company to learn from him, to understand that compassion wasn't weakness but a force that built stronger foundations than steel and glass ever could. When Daniel returned home that morning, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Lily ran into his arms, and he lifted her with a strength he didn't know he still had. For the first time in years, he felt hope.